The Federal and Devaki Specialty Hospital jointly present the Madurai Marathon 2024 Run for Health on Sunday, October 20th, 2024. Entry is free for all.
Welcome to the Federal's Worldly Wise, a weekly program that attempts to understand contemporary international issues. Today we are looking at Myanmar, a country that borders India, but about which little is known or covered in this country. For the last 4.5 years, since February 2021, Myanmar has been traumatized by a military takeover that has triggered an armed uprising against the government or the State Administration Council, SAC. Reports say that the armed revolt is gradually winning over the state. At the same time, the government too is steadfast in holding on to power. There is no move, at least not very visible, towards reconciliation and a way out of the crisis that Myanmar finds itself in. Bordering India's northeast, developments in Myanmar are bound to impact India in some way or the other. The implications, therefore, are quite varied with a long-term quotient. To discuss this and explain some of the issues facing Myanmar, we have with us Suhas Chakma, Director of the Delhi-based Rights and Risks Analysis Group. Mr. Chakma follows issues in India's northeast and the Chittagong hill tracts of Bangladesh, which share a border with Myanmar. Mr. Chakma has been following the conflict and governance issues in Myanmar over the last 3 decades. Welcome to the Federal's Worldly Wise program, Mr. Chakma.
Thank you.
It's been 4 years since the mass armed uprising began after military chief Min Aung Hlaing took over as president. What is the current situation?
Well, the current situation is the government of Myanmar, that's the military junta, has lost control over vast tracts of lands across the country. It was earlier unseen and unheard of or even unthinkable since October 2023. And today, I think we are in October 2024. In last 1 year, it's absolutely clear that Myanmar government does not hold any control over the territories in the country, except possibly in certain metropolis like Naypyidaw, Rangoon, etc. And in certain areas where the military command has been trying to hold on in the light of the advances which have been made by the insurgent groups as well as the national unity government. And I think we could fairly say that the government of Myanmar has lost so much of territories, it is unlikely to recover ever unless it comes to a reconciliation with these various groups which are opposing the junta. And one could say, I think, in a way, this is the first freedom movement in Myanmar, because when Myanmar got independence from the British in 1948, there was no major freedom struggle till 1935. Myanmar, Burma was part of India. It was only after the adoption of the Government of India Act of 1935 by the British that Myanmar officially became different from rest of India. And if we were to look at the movement of the Burmese in the freedom struggle, you could see that they were not as intensive in other parts of Indian subcontinent, simply because the British allowed the Myanmarese, the Burma people, as well as most of the ethnic groups to govern themselves. And those are territories in which the British, in any case, did not have any control. And even today, those areas are inaccessible. So you can imagine what was the situation in those areas 78 years back. So therefore,
Right.
this is possibly the first instant where the communities, different ethnic groups, which constitute the people of Myanmar, are engaged in or they are experiencing. So I think it's an extremely volatile situation. But I mean, the government has lost control over the territories.
Yeah, has this Operation 1027, which is the movement that began 27th October last year, has that made a huge difference from the previous 3 years?
Well, absolutely, because previous 3 years, many of the groups we are engaged, sometimes in talks, sometimes in conflict with the junta. So it wasn't clear, but it's only in the last 1 year actually, the areas or territories which are captured by the insurgent groups. So actually, whatever areas have been lost, the significant amount have been lost only in the last 1 year. And prior to that, of course, there were clashes. I mean, in some areas the military suffered in a way, military suffered setbacks, but they had not lost the control over the territories. Now I think we are talking about almost liberated territories, the emergence of the proto-state. You could say that the Rakhine state is a proto-state where
Uh-huh.
the Arakan army is controlling the de facto authority only in certain areas where their Western Command is based, and some parts of Sittwe which have not been controlled. So whatever has happened, it has happened only in the last 1 year.
In fact, we had a report in the Federal saying that the armed resistance has surrounded Mandalay.
Yes.
So has that made is that a game changer in some ways, you think?
Well, I mean, it is a game changer, and at some point of time, if they lose either Mandalay or Rangoon, that's the end of the regime. So if I mean, if they lose Mandalay, then of course the government is gone.
But tell me, typically in such situations, governments can sometimes opt for a discussion or a talks or some kind of a via media where democracy is restored and, so that it doesn't lose the entire thing, all the power. Is it past that situation or is there any attempt being made along these lines or?
I think there are attempts being made, and the government of Myanmar, that's the military junta, should appreciate one particular fact that none of the groups at this point of time still, calling for independence, complete separation. So, in that sense, I think it's a very positive development, despite the fact that many of the proto-states have already emerged in Myanmar. So for this kind of talks, there were talks last week in Jakarta, which was facilitated prior to the ASEAN summit. And if we read the reports today, you could see that the next president of the ASEAN, which is Malaysia. Malaysia is interested to carry on these talks between Myanmar and the insurgent groups and the national unity government. So there are still, I think, attempts, and there is still room for negotiation. But because the military has lost the territories virtually, and they have been overrun in many of the areas, the negotiations are going to be very, very difficult because you have a section of the military who have vested interest to remain in power. And it is this interest actually which kept the Burmese junta alive, this same interest which overthrew the Aung San Suu Kyi's government. It's the same interest which kept control of the Myanmarese junta over the constitution and the elected government during the previous time. So now, if they come to some sort of negotiations, it is not going to be deja vu. No, it's not going to be repeat of history. But if the Myanmarese junta is interested to keep the country united, they can still find a solution. At the end of the day, it's actually a simple problem. You give
Yeah.
enough autonomy to the people and share the power or give back the power to the people. And why should that be a problem in any country or for any institutional organization which
Right.
actually believes in the national, interest? So that's why I think there is still room if the Myanmar's government wants to engage in this process. But it's not going to be easy because the tables have been turned. Myanmar's government still has access to enormous amount of resources. They can export gems, they can export timbers, they can export fish and lots of other products, irrespective of whether other people have access to basic facilities or not, because the state, in terms of providing basic facilities, it doesn't exist. So therefore, I mean, whatever it can sell, it can generate adequate resources, and they still have the firepower. And of course, a number of governments, whether the Americans, Indians, or the Chinese, everybody is up to some sort of engagement, which makes the problem much more complex.
In fact, that was my, before that, I thought, let me check, what is the status of the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi? Have they, are they playing any role at all in any manner, I mean, at this stage?
Well, the national unity government is actually, in a way, was, I mean, of the NLD. NLD stands itself as the national unity government. So they are involved in it. So the national unity government is led by the Burma people, which are the main opposition party and which are of, which are of the National League for Democracy. So it's the same thing, which has formed the government in exile.
Okay. So, what is, there has been a general, not that kind of a publicity which Myanmar's struggle has received around the world in the media. You hear lots of Gaza or Ukraine, and, somewhere Myanmar has been marginalized. Why do you think this is? I mean, is it because the world powers don't see any great stakes in Myanmar, or, I mean, what is it?
Well, first of all, I think, it has been a typical insurgent movement, and in areas where there is extremely limited access. You cannot access from the China or the Myanmar side, and you cannot access from the northeastern parts of India, and the access from Thailand is very, very limited. So therefore, whatever comes out, it's almost the statements from the insurgent groups. So therefore, there is an adequate interest. And secondly, I think the advancement which were made by the insurgent groups, they have been slow. They have not overrun the authorities of the junta, in a quick fashion. And so therefore, there was not any kind of shock and awe which will necessarily, attract the attention of the international community. And Myanmar has been in this situation for such a long period of time, almost since 1962, after the first military coup. So, people have become insensitive to a large extent. And because there are no televised broadcasts like in Gaza or in Lebanon. So that's why there is not adequate interest. So if there was a massive influx of, refugees because of genocide, etc., then there would have been. But as I said, this has been purely a conflict between two armed forces. One is of the non-state actors, the other is of the security forces, the junta. So, of course, the civilians have been victims, but it is not as intensive as it has been in other areas. So I think that's one of the reasons why there has been less attention to the conflict in Myanmar.
What has been India's response to this, the situation in Myanmar, and is it different from China's, or, I mean, how is it? I mean, how do you see it?
Well, India is in a way bind with respect to Myanmar simply because it shares such a long border, and whereas India in the entire northeast has lots of insurgent groups. So therefore, it has to, in a way, deal with the issue more carefully than China, which doesn't have any insurgent group. And add that to the northeastern region, then of course you have the Rohingya crisis, which is in the Chittagong hill tracts of Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar areas, and it involves and some of the Islamic groups. So the government of India has to be a bit more circumspect. Having said that, I think the government of India in the beginning has been engaged with the military junta, and they are providing support, or they have been providing support to the military junta. But at this point of time, I think since the collapse of the junta in Rakhine State, the government of India has been engaging some way or the other. In fact, one of the members of parliament from Mizoram had visited the areas immediately after the major victories achieved by the Arakan army. And I think in November, there is supposed to be a meeting with some of the one of the policy group or think tank in Delhi is organizing a meeting with the insurgent groups who are the proto-state in Myanmar. At the end of the day, these are the groups which control the territories on the borderlines of India, where there is no Myanmar army or Myanmar junta government.
Yeah.
So the government of India has no option to except to engage. But what are those engagement at this point in time? Whether it is to facilitate some kind of a peace process or encourage them to participate in the elections which the Myanmar's government is organizing, in which the Indian officials or authorities have been assisting. So it remains unclear. But I think what is clear is that the government of India, through track to diplomacy, has decided to engage with some of the insurgent groups.
So, and the other, of course, very obvious question: how has it impacted the Northeast in any way? This disturbances in Myanmar, the revolt.
Well, I think the impact on the Northeast India is yet to be seen, except that certain people have fled to escape, to get asylum in India because of the intensification of the armed conflict. So you have about 4,000 to 5,000 people from Myanmar in Manipur, whereas you have possibly between 40,000 to 50,000 in Mizoram. And we all know that this presence of 4 to 5,000 people in Manipur has been used as the raison d'etre for the conflict in Manipur. So in that sense, you could see that India has been badly affected with the influx of the refugees. But I would say the other impacts are yet to be seen by India, and it will take some more time to see what kind of impact it will have on India. But I think at this point of time, I think where the impact it's in Manipur, but once again, it is not necessarily an impact. It's just the politicization of the persecution of the people in Myanmar for the local ethno-politics in Manipur. It is not a direct impact, because if it was a direct impact, then in that case, Manipur would have seen more riots. Mizoram would have seen more riots, because Mizoram has about 50,000 people, and whereas, as I said, Manipur has only about 5,000 people.
Right. As an organization, are you involved in any of these activities there? I mean, in terms of I'm making assessments and surveys and all that.
We are involved in it. So we did a survey about origin and assessment, and in fact, we had a briefing for the diplomats here on 9th of October at the India International Center, basically explaining the link, basically explaining the conflicts in Myanmar and Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is also almost heading towards civil war, and it's threat to regional peace and security. So we are involved in it. We follow the situation quite closely, and also, as I said, we are the first one, I think, in India to have organized a briefing for the international community in Delhi. So they were quite receptive to it, because these are areas which are not known, which are not reported, and which are not accessible. So therefore, these are best closed door areas, and that's what we do, and we continue to monitor.
What has been China's response to the events in Myanmar?
Well, China is the key actor. Because I think we have to understand one particular fact. That is, when you overrun an established military junta, which has been ruling the country for about 78 years, obviously there have been massive access to arms, ammunition, everything. Otherwise, without arms and ammunition, you cannot, even if you have manpower, you still require, access to firepower. So this
Yeah.
firepower is the question of where would they be coming from? And it is mostly unlikely from India, because India is helping the military junta, and India would be very worried given the insurgency in the northeast. The Americans may be providing some financial assistance to national unity government, or some, I mean, sort of diplomatic support, but the Americans are not known, or at least things have not come to the public domain that this is something which the Americans are doing. So obviously, I mean, then who else fund the arms? And I don't think there is any country in ASEAN which has the authority or power or interest in that sense to get engaged in the conflict in Myanmar. So it has to be China, and they have been um, uh, supporting the junta. They have been supporting the insurgent groups. But at certain stage, when insurgent groups take over territories, they become proto-state. Then, of course, they outgrow. And
Yeah.
there are a number of groups, number of organizations, the insurgent groups. They are not, typical thugs or etc. They have been running their, political ideologically independent movement from the Burmans. So there is
Hmm.
some commitment. There's
Right.
some commitment to the issue. It's, you may agree or may not agree, but it is an armed movement for freedom struggle. So it took place in many parts of the world. I mean,
Right.
many countries in the world, we are liberated through armed struggle. So Myanmar's insurgent groups, therefore, had this commitment for a long period of time. And if they have this kind of commitment, well, of course, at certain point of time, they will be much more independent than a particular government like China would like. Because
Hmm.
when your ideological base is sound and strong, then of course you are not like any other, I would say, I mean, insurgent groups which you see in many parts
Yeah.
of the world, or which have emerged, especially after September 11th. So that's why I
Right.
think some of the groups might have outgrown China.
Hmm. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chakma, for giving such a detailed explanation. Thank you so much.
The Federal and Devaki Specialty Hospital jointly present the Madurai Marathon 2024 Run for Health on Sunday, October 20th, 2024. Entry is free for all.